Have you ever whispered to yourself that you are only enduring, only pushing through, only holding on by your fingernails? Have you ever wondered why some women walk through storms that should have broken them, yet somehow they come out steadier, softer, brighter, as if the wind itself polished their spirit? Welcome back to the channel. Today I want to speak to the part of you that feels tired in a way sleep cannot fix. The part of you that has been brave for too long. The part of you that learned to smile and say, "It is fine," while something inside kept shrinking. Because there is a strange truth that many people never realize until much later. Sometimes your hardest season is not life punishing you. Sometimes it is life rerouting you. Sometimes what feels like being dragged is actually being carried to a different shore. And I want to be very careful with the way I say this. Pain is real. Loss is real. Exhaustion is real. We are not going to romanticize suffering. We are not going to pretend that betrayal is a blessing or that loneliness is cute. No. But we are going to look at something deeper. We are going to look at how suffering can become a doorway to awakening, and how destiny often turns not when the outside world changes first, but when your inner world finally becomes honest. So let me tell you a story. As always, it is a story about one person, but it is also a story about many. You might recognize yourself in it. You might recognize your sister, your mother, your friend, your partner. And if you recognize anyone, do not rush to judge. Just listen, because sometimes the mirror is not there to shame you. The mirror is there to wake you up. Her name is Annie, not because that is her legal name, but because it is simple, and because people like her often become simple on the outside. They become easy to read, easy to label. The reliable one, the good one, the mature one, the one who never causes trouble, the one who can handle it. Annie learned it early that love was something you earned, not something you received. Earned by being useful, by being agreeable, by not making anyone uncomfortable, by not needing too much, by not taking up space. She learned that if she had feelings, she should swallow them. If she had needs, she should hide them. If she had dreams, she should postpone them. She wrapped all of that in a word people praise: being sensible, being considerate, being strong. And for a long time, it looked like it worked. Teachers liked her. Friends trusted her. Family relied on her. Partners felt safe with her. She became the kind of woman people describe as easy to be with. But inside, something was quietly drying out, not exploding, not collapsing, drying. There's a particular kind of suffering that does not look dramatic from the outside. It looks like functioning. It looks like showing up. It looks like paying bills and answering messages and taking care of everyone. But inside it feels like fading, like your color is washing out, like your laughter is becoming automatic, like your eyes are tired even when you smile. Annie did not call it suffering. She called it life. She said to herself, everyone is tired. Everyone is busy. Everyone has problems. She used that sentence like a blanket. It covered her pain. It also covered her truth. Then the season changed. Not all at once, but in the way a storm gathers. First, her relationship began to feel colder. Her partner did not hit her or scream at her. Nothing obviously evil. It was subtler. He dismissed her feelings. He made jokes when she tried to talk seriously. He acted like her sensitivity was a problem. When she asked for reassurance, he gave her logic. When she asked for closeness, he gave her advice. When she asked for warmth, he gave her silence. Annie responded the way she always responded. She tried harder. She cooked more. She listened more. She stayed calmer. She made herself smaller. She told herself, if I am good enough, he will finally relax into love. She believed love was a reward for effort. At the same time, her family leaned on her more. A parent was ill. A younger relative needed money. An older relative needed rides. There were phone calls, requests, guilt, and the unspoken expectation that Annie would handle it because Annie always handled it. And at work, the load increased. She was dependable. That meant she became the person other people threw their tasks onto. She was so good at carrying, people forgot she had a spine. If you have lived this, you know what happens next. Your life becomes a series of obligations. Your days are full, but your heart feels empty. You cannot point to one villain. There is no single monster to fight. The monster is a pattern. The monster is the slow erosion of self. Annie reached a point where she could not enjoy anything. Even good moments felt distant. She would sit at dinner and feel like she was watching herself from the outside. She would laugh at a joke and then feel strangely numb. She would lie in bed at night and stare at the ceiling while her mind replayed conversations, responsibilities, unpaid emotional debts. And because she had always been the strong one, she did not ask for help. She did not want to be a burden. She did not want anyone to worry. She did not want to admit that the version of her everyone relied on was cracking. One night, something small happened that became the final drop. A simple comment. Her partner said it casually, like he was commenting on the weather. He said, "You are overreacting. You always make things complicated." Now, if you hear that sentence in a calm state, it is still rude, but you might shrug. But Annie was not calm. She was depleted. She had been swallowing herself for years. That sentence landed like a stamp on her soul. It said your inner life does not matter. It said your pain is inconvenient. It said your sensitivity is a flaw. It said your reality is not real unless I approve it. Annie did not scream. She did not throw anything. She simply went to the bathroom, turned on the water, and stared at herself in the mirror. And what she saw was not a woman in crisis. She saw a woman who had been wilting quietly. That is the word that arrived in her mind. Wilting. Not breaking. Not exploding. Wilting. The kind of slow dying that happens when a flower gets water for everyone else but not for itself. She stood there and something inside her finally stopped pretending. A wave of grief rose up. Not just grief for the relationship. Not just grief for the workload. Grief for herself. Grief for the years she had spent believing she had to earn love. Grief for the person she could have been if she had been allowed to be real. She cried in a way she had not cried in years. Not polite tears. Not quiet tears. The kind of crying that shakes your ribs and makes you feel like your chest is being wrung out. And when she finally breathed again, she realized something that would change the direction of her life. Emotions were not her enemy. Emotions were her signal. She had been treating her feelings like a weakness, but her feelings were her guidance. They were the messages her deeper self kept sending, messages she had ignored until her body forced her to read them. That night became the beginning of a turning, not outside, but inside. This is where the first sign begins. Not a sign you see in the sky, not a sign someone else can measure. A sign in the inner river. For Annie, the first sign was that her emotions began to move again, naturally, honestly, without shame. For most of her life, Annie had tried to be rational in the way wounded people try to be rational. Not true clarity, not wise discernment, more like emotional starvation disguised as maturity. She had told herself, do not cry, do not be angry, do not be needy, do not be dramatic. She had called that strength. But after that night, she began to see the truth. When you block your emotions, you do not become stronger. You become clogged. You become stiff. You become reactive. Because emotions that are not allowed to flow do not disappear. They relocate. They move into your body as tension. They move into your relationships as resentment. They move into your choices as self-sabotage. They move into your fate as repeated patterns. So Annie did something that sounds small, but it was revolutionary for her. She stopped saying it is fine when it was not fine. At first, she practiced alone. She would feel a tightness in her stomach, and instead of brushing it off, she would say quietly, "I do not like this." She would feel a sadness, and instead of swallowing it, she would say, "I am hurting." She would feel anger, and instead of turning it into silence, she would say, "I need a boundary." The first time she tried to express this to her partner, her voice shook, not because she was weak, but because she was breaking a lifetime of conditioning. She said, "When you said I am overreacting, I felt dismissed. I am not trying to fight. I am telling you what I feel. I need respect when I speak." Her partner blinked, surprised, because he had never met that version of her. He had met the version that smiled and adjusted, the version that forgave instantly, the version that did not make him uncomfortable. When she showed up as real, it disrupted the old dynamic. And here is the part many women fear. When you begin to become real, some people will say you change. They will not always say it kindly. Sometimes they say it like an accusation. "You changed. You are not fun anymore. You are too sensitive. You are being difficult." But the deeper truth is this: you did not become difficult. You became visible. Annie did not say her truth to make her partner instantly better. She said her truth because she could no longer afford to abandon herself. This is the hidden spiritual principle underneath healthy boundaries. A boundary is not a wall to punish others. A boundary is a line that tells the world, "I exist here. I will not disappear to keep you comfortable." And something else happened. Annie allowed herself to cry. She stopped treating tears like embarrassment. She started treating them like cleansing, like a storm that clears the air, like a shower that rinses the dust of forced smiling off the skin. She cried in her car after work. She cried in the bath. She cried while writing in a notebook late at night. And with every honest tear, she felt a little more alive. Then she discovered the question that had been hiding beneath all her suffering. It was not, "Why is my partner cold?" It was not, "Why is life so hard?" The deeper question was, "Am I worthy of love?" That question is a spiritual wound. Because when you do not believe you are worthy, you will accept crumbs. You will work for affection. You will tolerate disrespect. You will shift into whatever you think will keep you safe. And you will call it love. When Annie finally saw that question clearly, she realized she was not only dealing with a relationship problem, she was dealing with a life practice, a path of inner cultivation, a path of awakening from the trance of unworthiness. So she began to practice mindfulness, not as a trend, but as survival. She learned to pause when emotion rose. She learned to breathe and observe. She learned that she could feel sadness without drowning in it, feel anger without attacking, feel fear without surrendering her dignity. She started telling herself sentences that rewired her inner world. "I can be upset and still be kind. I can be angry and still be wise. I can be disappointed and still be respectful. I can be firm without being cruel. I can be soft without being powerless." This is not just emotional intelligence. This is inner freedom. This is the first taste of awakening. When you realize your feelings are not chains, they are weather. You can watch them. You can learn from them. You do not have to become them. And as her inner river began to flow again, something else began to happen. Her energy changed. You can call it mood. You can call it presence. You can call it aura if you like, but everyone knows it when they feel it. She became less sticky, less desperate, less eager to please. She became clearer, cleaner, more grounded. When a woman becomes grounded, her life begins to rearrange around her. Not because the universe is a vending machine, but because her choices change. Her standards change. Her posture changes. Her voice changes. She stops feeding the old patterns that kept her trapped. And that brings us into the second sign, the one that usually comes after the first. Once a woman stops blocking her emotions, she begins to grow upward. She begins to take her life into her own hands. Annie had been busy her whole life, but her business was not the same as building. She was busy keeping everyone satisfied, busy maintaining peace, busy avoiding conflict, busy proving she was good. That kind of busy is not productive. It is draining. It is inner friction. It is spiritual leakage. After that night in the bathroom, she started to ask herself a question that most people avoid because it is too powerful. What kind of life do I actually want? At first, she felt blank. That is common. When you spend years serving other people's expectations, your own desires become faint. They do not vanish, but they become quiet, like a voice in another room. So she did not demand an instant answer. She treated it like planting a tree. Slow, consistent, daily care. She noticed how much time she spent numbing herself. Scrolling, watching, drifting, anything to avoid feeling the emptiness. She did not shame herself for it. She simply saw it clearly. And then she made a gentle shift. She took 1 hour that used to disappear into distraction and she invested it into learning. She signed up for a course in a skill she had always been interested in, not because she needed to impress anyone, but because she needed to remember what it felt like to grow for herself. She started exercising, not to punish her body, but to return to it, because when you move your body with intention, you remind your nervous system that you are not helpless. You are not only being pushed by life. You can move forward on purpose. As she practiced these small daily actions, she noticed something profound. Her confidence began to return, but it was not loud confidence, not the kind that needs applause. It was quiet confidence, the kind that comes from self-trust, the kind that says, even if no one saves me, I can support myself. She wrote down a few words that felt like inner lanterns: dignity, freedom, stability. Not stability as in staying stuck, stability as in being able to hold herself emotionally, freedom as in having options, dignity as in not begging for respect. Whenever she felt the old pull to shrink again, she would remember those words. She would remember that her life was not meant to be a constant audition. She was not here to perform goodness until someone handed her love. And then she practiced something that changed her working life. She learned to say no, not with hostility, not with revenge, with clarity. She would say, I can do that task, and I can do it well, but I need this amount of time, or I need this resource, or I need to remove another task. She stopped absorbing other people's chaos as if it was her duty. At first, she felt guilty. Of course she did. Guilt is what you feel when you stop being useful to the people who benefited from your self-neglect. That guilt is not always moral. Sometimes it is just conditioning. But she kept practicing, and something interesting happened. People began to treat her differently. Not because she became mean, but because she became clear. Humans respond to clarity. When you have no boundaries, people treat your energy like a public resource. When you have boundaries, people sense that your presence has value. This is one of the simplest cause and effect laws in human life. How you treat yourself teaches the world how to treat you. It is not always immediate, and it is not always fair, but over time the pattern is reliable. And the deeper spiritual law beneath it is this: when you stop abandoning yourself, you stop creating the karma of self-betrayal. When you stop self-betrayal, you stop attracting dynamics that require you to betray yourself to belong. You might have noticed this in your own life. If you constantly overgive, you often end up with people who constantly take, not because the universe hates you, but because your behavior signals that you will tolerate it. When you shift your behavior, the whole environment shifts. Some people leave, some people adjust, and you start meeting different energy, different opportunities, different relationships. Annie began to feel something she had never felt consistently before. A steady inner posture, the feeling of being held, not by another person, but by her own spine. Now, destiny does not usually turn in a dramatic cinematic way. Most of the time, it turns like a ship adjusting course. Small degrees, quiet corrections. But after months of Annie practicing this upward growth, she noticed that life began to open in small ways. A colleague offered support. A new project appeared. A friend invited her into a healthier circle. Doors did not fall from the sky, but her eyes began to see doors that were always there. Because that is what clarity does. When your mind is no longer fogged by self-doubt, you can see the road. This is the second sign. A woman stops living only to maintain and begins living to become. And then we arrive at the third sign, the one that is the most invisible and also the deepest. Annie learned to slow down and in the quiet, repair herself. This might surprise you. Many people think the turning point of destiny is hustle, more effort, more pushing, more proving. But for many women, the turning point is rest. Not lazy rest, sacred rest. The kind of rest that restores your inner life. The kind of rest that stops you from making desperate decisions. Annie used to believe that stopping was waste. She believed she had to stay busy to stay valuable. If she rested, she felt guilty. If she did nothing, she felt anxious. Her nervous system had been trained to associate stillness with danger, because in stillness, you feel what you have been avoiding. But she began to see that constant business was not always productivity. Sometimes business is anesthesia. It keeps you from facing the emptiness. It keeps you from noticing that your relationship is not nourishing you. It keeps you from noticing you are lonely even when people are around. It keeps you from admitting you are exhausted. So Annie began to create space. She would take a walk on a quiet street without headphones, just hearing the wind, the footsteps, the distant city noise. She would sit at home with a small lamp, a warm drink, and no agenda. She would practice being with herself without needing to earn it. The first few times were uncomfortable. Her mind raced. It tried to pull her back into tasks. It tried to invent emergencies. It tried to create reasons to avoid stillness. But she stayed. She breathed. She observed. She let the thoughts pass like clouds. And something tender happened. In the quiet, she started hearing herself again. She started journaling, not to be poetic, but to be honest. She would ask herself, what drained me today? Where did I say yes when I meant no? Where did I shrink? Where did I betray myself? Where did I act from fear? Where did I act from love? As she wrote, she began to see hurt patterns like threads. She began to see how often she had traded hurt Ruth for temporary peace. She began to see how often she had accepted disrespect to avoid abandonment. She began to see how often she had confused self-sacrifice with virtue. And then she discovered a spiritual insight that changes many lives. Real kindness includes kindness to yourself. Real compassion includes compassion inward. If you only pour outward, your heart eventually becomes resentful. You begin to feel that people owe you. You begin to feel bitter. That bitterness is the cost of ignoring your own humanity. So Annie began practicing self-compassion. She would speak to herself the way she would speak to a friend. She would say, "You are tired. You are doing your best. You do not have to be perfect to be worthy. You do not have to suffer to prove you are good." She also began to study teachings that helped her mind settle. Teachings about impermanence, about cause and effect, about how clinging creates suffering, about how letting go creates freedom. She did not turn it into a performance. She did not argue about labels. She simply used it as a tool to return to sanity. One day, she had an argument with her partner again. It was intense. Old Annie would have apologized quickly just to restore peace, even if she was hurt. Old Annie feared the relationship ending more than she feared losing herself. But this time, she slowed down. She felt the emotion rise. She breathed. She watched the urge to chase and fix. She watched the fear. And then she said something calm and clear. "We can stay together, but we need to learn how to respect each other. I will not continue in a pattern where my feelings are dismissed." Her partner reacted badly at first. He accused her of being dramatic. He said she was changing. He said she was making problems. Annie did not argue. She did not beg. She simply stayed grounded. She said, "I am not trying to win. I am trying to be healthy. If we cannot do that, then we need to rethink this." That moment was destiny turning, not because the partner suddenly transformed, but because Annie chose herself without hatred. She chose truth without cruelty. She chose stability without numbness. This is what slow repair looks like. It is not flashy. It is not loud, but it changes everything. And here is why this third sign matters so much. When you are constantly rushed, you make low-quality decisions. You choose from fear. You choose from lack. You choose from the craving to end discomfort quickly. That is how people stay in harmful relationships. That is how people accept bad jobs. That is how people settle for lives that do not fit them. They are not stupid. They are exhausted. They are rushed. They are desperate for relief. But when you slow down, your mind clears. And when your mind clears, you can see. And when you can see, you can choose. And when you can choose, your destiny changes. Many people think destiny is an external force, but destiny is also the result of repeated choices. Choices come from inner state. Inner state comes from practice. That is why inner cultivation is not optional if you want a different life. It is the foundation. Now, I want to step out of Annie's story for a moment and speak directly to the listener who feels like Annie. If you are in a season where you keep thinking, "I am just surviving," I want you to consider a different possibility. Maybe you are being refined. Maybe life is stripping away what is not true. Maybe the pressure is revealing what you have tolerated for too long. Maybe the loneliness is showing you where you have been abandoning yourself. Maybe the exhaustion is telling you that you cannot keep living on self-sacrifice and call it love. Sometimes the universe does not speak in words. It speaks in patterns. It speaks through your body. It peeks through your emotional signals. It peeks through repeated disappointment, not to punish you, but to wake you up. If you keep getting the same kind of relationship, maybe it is not fate. Maybe it is your wound choosing what feels familiar. If you keep losing yourself to keep others, maybe it is not virtue. Maybe it is fear. If you keep feeling drained, even when you are doing everything right, maybe you are not doing everything right. Maybe you are doing everything for everyone else. And I know how hard it is to admit that, because if you admit that, you have to face a bigger truth. You might have to change. You might have to disappoint people. You might have to risk being misunderstood. You might have to walk away from dynamics that have shaped your identity. That is terrifying. And there is also where freedom begins. Now let us return to Annie, because after she began to slow down and repair herself, something surprising happened. Her relationship either had to evolve or it would end. That pressure forced truth. At first, her partner resisted. He missed the old version of Annie, the version that absorbed everything. He said he felt like she was making him the villain. Annie did not accept that story. She said, "I am not calling you a villain. I am saying I cannot live in a pattern where I vanish. If you want us to work, we both need to grow." He did not change overnight. People rarely do. But over time, he began to adjust, not because Annie threatened him, but because Annie stopped feeding the old dynamic. When she no longer responded with instant forgiveness, he had to face consequences. When she no longer softened everything, he had to meet her in reality. Sometimes people rise when you rise. Sometimes they leave. Either way, your destiny turns toward truth. Annie also noticed her friendships changing. Some friends who only came to her for emotional labor faded away. At first, that hurt. She wondered if she was becoming selfish. But then she realized she was not losing friends. She was losing roles. The role of the free therapist, the role of the endless giver, the role of the always available rescuer. In the space left behind, new relationships began to appear. People who respected her pace, people who asked how she was and actually listened, people who did not treat her boundaries as an insult. This is another quiet law. When you stop leaking your energy, you become magnetic to healthier energy. And at work, she began to be seen differently, not as the person who would take anything, but as a person with standards. That changed her opportunities. Leaders trust people who can manage themselves, people who can say yes and no wisely, people who can protect their energy. Those are leadership qualities. Even if you never hold a title, Annie did not become perfect. She still had nights where she doubted. She still had moments where she wanted to return to the old comfort of pleasing. She still had waves of grief, because when you wake up, you also grieve the years you spent asleep. But her grief was different now. It was not hopeless. It was cleansing. It was the grief of returning to yourself. One evening, she sat with a cup of tea and looked at the city lights through her window. And she realized something that made her smile. Not a forced smile, a real one. She realized she no longer feared being alone the way she used to, because she had become someone she could live with. That is a profound shift. When you can live with yourself, you stop bargaining your soul for companionship. And that is why we can say, sometimes what looks like the hardest season is actually the turning point. Not because suffering is good, but because suffering can break the illusion that kept you trapped. Now, I want to summarize the heart of this story in a way that feels practical, because I do not want you to leave inspired but unchanged. The first turning is when your emotions begin to flow honestly, when you stop calling your pain weakness when you stop swallowing your truth, when you start naming what you feel without shame. This is the beginning of awakening, because you cannot change what you will not admit. The second turning is when you begin to grow upward, intentionally, when you stop using all your energy to maintain other people's approval and you invest some of it into your own becoming. This is self-respect in motion. This is how you build stability that does not depend on someone else being kind today. The third turning is when you slow down enough to repair yourself, when you stop using business ends as anesthesia, when you rest without guilt, when you reflect without panic, when you practice presence. This is how your mind clears and your choices become wise. And wise choices are the seeds of a different future. You do not have to call it spirituality if you do not want to, but it is a spiritual process because it is about the inner life. It is about the heart. It is about the way you relate to yourself. Then that relationship determines every other relationship you will ever have. Now I want to share a reflection that might create resonance. I have seen many women who think they are failing because they feel tired. They think fatigue means they are not strong enough. But often fatigue is not weakness. It is information. It is the body saying, the way you have been living is not sustainable. It is the soul saying, you are not aligned with your truth. It is life saying, stop before you break. I have also seen women who stayed in relationships where they were constantly minimized, not because they were foolish, but because they were afraid of being alone, afraid of starting over, afraid that asking for respect would cost them everything. And then one day, they reached a point where the pain of staying became greater than the fear of leaving. That day is destiny turning. I have seen women who spent years being the caretaker, the mediator, the peacekeeper, until they realized they had never been cared for in the same way. And when they finally stopped overgiving, they felt guilty at first, and then they felt free. That is destiny turning. I have seen women who thought their sensitivity was a curse until they learned it was a compass. Their sensitivity was pointing to what was wrong. Their tears were pointing to what was missing. Their anger was pointing to what needed boundaries. Their exhaustion was pointing to what needed rest. When they learned to listen instead of suppress, their lives changed. That is destiny turning. And the reason this creates such deep emotion is because it touches a universal human longing. The longing to be loved without performing. The longing to be seen without explaining. The longing to rest without guilt. The longing to exist without earning. If you feel that longing, you are not broken. You are waking up. So here is a gentle invitation. If you are in a hard season, do not rush to label it as bad luck. Ask yourself, what is this season trying to teach me about myself? Where have I been abandoning myself? Where have I been shrinking? Where have I been over-giving? Where have I been tolerating what hurts? Where have I been rushing instead of listening? And then choose one small act of self-respect, one honest sentence, one boundary, one hour invested in your growth, one afternoon of rest without apology, one conversation where you speak your truth calmly, one decision postponed until you are clear. Small acts are not small. They are seeds. And seeds become futures. As we close, I want to hear from you. Have you ever lived through a season that felt like pure suffering, but later you realized it was guiding you toward a better life? What signs showed up in you when your destiny began to turn? Share your story in the comments. Your words might be the exact mirror someone else needs tonight. And if you want more long-form videos like this, subscribe to the channel, like the video so it reaches the people who need it. And if you want to support this space more deeply, consider joining the membership. It helps keep these teachings coming, and it helps us build a community where awakening, wisdom, compassion, and inner practice are not just ideas, but real life. Life gets noisy. Work, stress, expectations. Sometimes we lose touch with the quiet part of ourselves. Bracelet isn't just an accessory. It's a small reminder that you deserve peace. You deserve moments of stillness. You deserve to hold on to your inner balance. If one of these bracelets speaks to your heart, you'll find the purchase link in the description below. And even more auctions available on our channel's shop page. Pick home the one that feels right.